time we have Dr. Carrie, and she's back again.
Hey, woo! Welcome back.
We're so excited to have you back. We're extremely excited, and I just feel like we're just gonna let her do her thing at this point because this conversation, I'm excited. I'm
If
so
I
excited.
just want to remind all our listeners, if you don't know who Dr. Carrie Strayer is, please go to episode 6,
Oh, I
where
love
she
that.
came to talk about communication and the
Mhm.
importance of providing a persuasive
Mhm.
speech. So please
So episode
make sure you
6.
go back.
Yep. So that will give you an idea what conversation we're having today.
Yes.
So, Dr. Carrie, how have you been?
I've been great. I just was down in Florida
Oh, nice.
doing work,
course.
teaching some of this stuff to hospital employees.
Oh yeah,
Nice.
for our conversation last time. I remember now.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
amazing. Okay.
Just back last night.
Yeah.
So
Good.
I'm over here
Hopefully you're
freezing.
not a little jet lag.
I wonder, is it different in Florida compared to Ohio when it comes of like, regulations, laws and all that?
well, they've had. No, I think we're similar in a lot of ways.
Okay.
We both have Republican governors who have,
Yes. Okay.
Gotcha.
followed
Okay.
some of those same roads.
Gotcha.
So.
Okay. I wonder. Okay.
Okay. Well, Doc, so today we've, I know with our last episode we talked about unconscious communication. So I think today we thought we could dig deeper. So go ahead. What's the conversation today? What is unconscious communication?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
and I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going
Okay.
to talk first about unconscious,
Okay.
Mhm.
and then we're going to talk about conscious.
Ooh,
Okay.
So once
okay.
you are more aware of what you're doing, some of the things you can do to improve.
Mhm.
But unconscious communication, fascinating. Somebody did a study years ago, and they said, between 65 and 93% of your meaning comes from your nonverbal communication.
Interesting.
Now, we're not sure where they got that statistic, but it certainly is true that quite a bit of it comes from the nonverbal because, nonverbal is so many different elements. It's your facial expression, it's whether you're making eye contact, it's your tone of voice, it's your posture, all of those kind of things. And they're happening continually. Whereas what you're saying, may come for a while and then you sit and listen and then you say something again. And so when I am looking at you, I'm going to be reading, does she look happy? Does she look bored? When I look over my students, are they engaged? Do they seem to have questions?
Yeah.
What's going on?
Interesting.
And if there is if what you're saying and how your nonverbal communication is communicating are not in line,
Mm-hmm.
we tend to believe the
The
nonverbal.
Yeah.
We perceive that that's less under your conscious control, that you're aware of the words coming out of your mouth, which we not always are, but most of the time. But that you may not be paying attention to if you're scowling or shaking your head no or something like that. And so when there are differences, if somebody goes, "Yeah, I love you," right?
No, you don't.
Right. Exactly.
I am
Do you
not
really?
convinced, sir.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so just becoming aware of the kind of messages that you're giving. Some people are much better at what we call masking, keeping their face straight.
That
What we call
poker face.
exactly poker face. Others,
The
we
face
were-
tells it all.
Exactly, the face. And it was very funny. After one of my very first classes, a student came up and she said, "I can tell when you think an answer is kind of off base." And I'm like, "You're not supposed to be able to read me that quickly." But
Thanks.
Interesting.
For telling me. I'll try to fix
Wow.
it.
yeah. But the other thing about nonverbals is that they very much differ across cultures, and maybe you can speak to that
Yes.
because we really believe in making eye contact and
Mhm.
mirrors to the soul and all that kind of thing. But there are a lot of cultures where, especially if somebody has seniority over you, they're an elder, they're a boss, something like that, you don't
Make
make
eye
I don't.
contact.
I'm not
Right.
even lying. In my culture, we're not even allowed to do it. I have to look down.
Mhm.
Even like when adults are sitting, we're not allowed to sit. We have to sit down next to them. I still do
Oh.
it till today.
Ah,
Like
It's
even
like
when I
the
sit next
adult
to my
table, the
dad,
children's table.
yeah. Even when I sit next to my dad, I have this ability where I have to be on the floor. Even with my
Okay.
grandmother, I can't help it when I'm like, okay, I why am I sitting with them? We're not equal in a way. So I have to like sit down and and I have to like stop doing it, but it's a tradition that I'm used to. So I hope that's not a bad thing. But,
Interesting.
thing.
Because for me, like my
Yeah.
culture, I'm originally from Dominican Republic, Latina, and I was raised, in a way, in a different way. Like I needed to give eye contact to my dad so he can understand I'm paying attention and I'm listening to
Mhm.
him. And I also needed to also use tools of communication, like responding back in a way, like at least saying,
Mhm.
okay, yes, so then he was, receiving
That you was
that,
acknowledging them.
that I was
Yeah.
acknowledging
Wow.
his message.
Interesting.
And also bringing another culture difference, Indians, okay,
Mhm.
let's for them say yes, they shake their head
Side to
in a
side,
side to
right?
side in a way saying yes. For me, when I came to this country, it took me a while for me to understand, or they say no, or like how should
Are
I
they saying
interpret
yeah?
this? So yeah, absolutely. We all use different levels of communication and how we respond based on how you communicate to others. So yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And even even if you're from essentially the same culture,
Mm-hmm.
generationally,
Yeah.
Yes.
what counts as politeness in
Yeah.
terms of eye contact, all those kind of things,
Play a factor.
greeting
Yep.
behavior,
Mhm.
and I would say gender all
Mhm.
make a
Yeah.
big difference because you're talking about acknowledging your dad and
Yes.
nodding and
Yes.
making the yeah,
Mhm.
okay,
Mhm.
thanks.
Yeah.
And those things are much more typical in women in this
Mhm.
culture than they are in men.
Men.
Mhm.
And part of that, part of the difference in the nonverbal communication is women. Couple of possible explanations. One is that women have dealt with preverbal children much more,
Mm.
and so they learn to read the signs, the cries, the
Makes
face.
sense.
And also, we are simply taught to be more relational
Mm.
Because
than
we're
men.
nurturers.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yes.
And so we enter conversations sort of
Differently.
trying to
Mhm.
engage,
Mhm.
trying to connect with the person.
Mhm.
Men in this culture historically have worked to establish themselves and their status and their
Mhm.
power and that
Mhm.
sort of thing. And power differentials make a difference in nonverbal communication. If you're the person with more power, you don't have to have as much ongoing eye contact as the
Yes.
person with less power. They
Mhm.
watch you to get signs, but also things like those with power are able to step into our sort of circle,
Mhm.
our personal bubble,
Mhm.
and establish touch and this sort of thing with less um, kind of negative response than people with less power.
Gotcha.
Interesting.
So yeah, I actually, when I was at the University of Texas doing my PhD, I was the teaching assistant for an entire semester long class in nonverbal communication.
Oh wow.
Interesting. Wow.
Fascinating kind of stuff, and looking at all the different studies, like showing a series of different faces making different emotional kinds of things. And women were much better at identifying what emotion was being displayed
Yeah.
than
We
men
are
were.
very good at
Women.
reading people.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I can read a whole room in 5 minutes.
Mhm.
Just by facial
And it's
expressions,
that's a very
mannerisms,
helpful thing, right?
things of that nature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so just to kind of make a bit of a leap, but being able to kind of pick up on those sorts of things. Um, One of the places that we, like I said, have done a lot of this work has been in hospitals, because when you're going into a room with a patient's family, you need to be able to determine, are they really understanding you? Do they still have questions? Are they fearful? Are they, what kind of things are going on? And today, because of all sorts of things, physicians have limited time often. And so they go in and they very quickly read down a series of things and may not ever kind of make that full connection.
Yeah.
Um,
Which isn't good, especially in the
no,
healthcare
it
system
it is
area.
not. It is not good. And so we often depend on nurses, and then depending on how the doctor is, will they actually listen to nurses?
Nurses.
Because that's a power differential. And
Yeah.
so it So part of what we're teaching in these classes is that you need to be aware of how you're coming across, not just reading others, but how are you coming across to other people
Right.
as a communicator.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things we say is if you're not aware of your weaknesses, you're the only one.
Mm.
Everybody else knows what you do well and do poorly as a communicator. And so you need to become aware, and that requires being open to feedback from other people. It requires listening to,
Mhm.
well, you often get your back up when I say something that's potentially negative. Um, and just checking to make sure that the way you're coming across is the way that you'd like to come across.
Yeah.
And that goes for any kind of professional, any kind of
Personal too.
personal,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Marriages, relationships. You can say, well, I'm not being argumentative. Well,
You just saying that right
exactly,
now shows
exactly.
that
And
you
the
are.
way you said that,
And the
Yeah.
way, the tone, your
Yeah.
demeanor, all that type of
Yeah.
stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Interesting.
so, and so then take it another step. One of the things that we say is when we send a message, right? We have an intention. I want to persuade somebody. I want to inform them. All these kind of things, and that's all well and good. But you also need to be aware that communication is a transaction.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's you go in to buy something, you pick the thing, you give them money, they say it's the right amount, right? It's this whole
Right.
back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Communication is the same way. You need to make sure that your messages have landed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was already teaching when we started getting email and all that kind of thing, and a lot of people in businesses immediately thought, "Oh, this is great! I can communicate to all 200 employees all
At
at the
one
same time,
time.
and it'll be perfect. They'll all get my message."
No.
No. Right? You have to. A good message is one that not just goes through, but that was understood.
That it
Mhm.
translated
Right.
and that they
Right.
got what you were trying to say.
Mhm.
If you send a message and it's just a whole bunch of gibberish and nobody understands it, now you got to go figure out, oh, I got to send another message,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
then you have a face-to-face conversation.
Exactly. Well, and a lot of supervisors we've talked to said I have to depend on a variety of things.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You
I
can't
maybe
just do one thing.
I'll send out a message, but then I'll have a meeting, and maybe with some people I need a one-on-one to make sure that they understood what I said. And what we think is clear, this is a really important project. We need to get on it at once. Well, what does that mean to someone?
Doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. Just
Right.
because you worded it that way,
Yeah.
sometimes someone else may perceive it differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so consciously you need to be checking. So here's a beautiful metaphor. Have you seen relay races where they pass the baton?
Yeah, I ran them. Anchor. Whoop, whoop.
Oh, perfect.
That means I was
Okay.
fast, y'all.
I believe it. So, how did you know
When to pass?
when to pass? Yeah.
Well, I didn't pass. I received.
Oh, you received, but
but how did I know to receive?
and how did they know when to let go?
When to let go? Usually in relay races, we have markers. So once they hit a certain mark and I understand they hit that mark, that's when I know to go. And then once I get to my certain stance, that's when I know to put my hand back for them to, so I can receive the baton. So usually that's how it transpires.
Okay. But think about this. You have a small child.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever handed, is it she, right?
Yes.
Have you handed her a glass full of
Milk.
juice?
Her milk.
Oh, okay.
Let's put it that way.
Her milk.
That's so she's gonna be like,
Give me milk.
Right. And so she's going for it, but
Yeah.
I mean, do you go here and let go?
No, you gotta make sure they got it.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Make sure I
Yes.
got that good handle on
Yeah.
it so I don't drop it or
Yes.
whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we like to think about communication. It's not enough that you handed it over. You have to make sure
They understand and they grasp
they
it.
grasp
Got
it.
it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lovely metaphor for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that bosses, doctors, all sorts of people like to do is say, okay, here are my instructions. You need to do this and this and this. Do you understand?
No.
No.
Okay, well, see, you guys are good.
If I don't
Most-
understand something, I'm not afraid to say
most
it.
people's
Mhm.
most people's immediate response is, yeah, uh-huh.
Oh,
And then you
Mhm.
walk out to the parking lot,
Yeah.
you don't
Right,
know
I'm
what
like,
they said.
No.
What the heck did I just
No.
agree to?
Right. And especially, and part of the reason we're teaching this in hospitals
As you
is
should.
patient handoff,
Yeah.
Mhm.
right? Okay, so you just broke a leg, you need to keep the cast dry, you need to do this, you need to put this salve on, and you need to take this medicine 3 times a day. Do you understand all that? Oftentimes they'll say yes. And again,
And then
walk
they get home
out.
and be like, what was I supposed to do? When was I
Right,
supposed to take my
right.
medication?
Mhm.
Okay.
Where's my discharge paper? Does it say it on there?
Okay, so I'm going to make you the doctor for a moment.
Okay.
So, what might you say to them instead of just listing off, or you list off the things they need to do? What would you then?
Do you have any questions? Is there someone else here with you that I can explain this to so you can have that second person to know?
Okay.
I'm a sucker for asking questions, getting more clarity. So I do that in my normal life.
Yeah, and think about that with a work team.
Yeah.
You say this is an important project, we need to get on it right away.
Mm.
Instead of saying, you got that? Yes. Well, how long do you think this is going to take?
Yeah.
Or what are some of the resources you might need to get this project started?
Right.
Or you ask questions that really get at whether they understood what's going on.
Yeah. Like those probing questions.
Well,
Mhm.
one thing I was going to say, just talking about work, there are points when, like when I'm having a meeting with certain associates, sometimes I feel like when I explain things to them and I ask them, "Do you guys understand?" They go, "Yes," and then I'm like,
Mhm.
"No, no, no, no. Do you understand?" Because I don't mind explaining. And sometimes when I do it as a group, they all say yes, but
Right,
then when I
right.
do it
Yeah.
individually,
Visually.
they'll all come back and like, actually, I didn't understand it. Can you break it down for me one more time? So this makes so much sense to me
Yeah.
right now.
Right.
And this is why I go to
Wow.
like, I worked for class actions litigations for a while and like reading legal briefs and things of that nature. Most people wouldn't be able to
No.
translate that to common sense.
Right.
And I was
Right.
really good at dumbing it down, as you would
Mhm.
say, maybe.
Yeah.
And like I had to
Wow.
supervise a team of like 50 people,
Oh my God.
different races, ages, and like having to break it down based on culture wise,
Mhm.
education wise, and things of that nature. It was always them coming
Yeah,
back to
coming
me
back.
afterwards. Like, I didn't understand this section of the document. Can you pretty much dumb it down some more?
Well, the only thing what I'm wondering, Doc, why do we do that? Because I tend to do that myself when I'm with a group of people. If I
Yeah.
don't understand, just go yes, and I'm like, I didn't understand
we
that, but I'm too
programmed to-
afraid to
No,
go and ask. Hey, why is that? Why do we do that to ourselves?
40 years of teaching college. You don't want to look foolish
Right.
Right.
in front of a group.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't want to admit that you didn't quite understand it.
Mhm.
Also, if it happens fairly quickly,
Yeah.
maybe you haven't had time to sort of
To
sit with
process
it,
it.
yeah.
And so, sometimes maybe the best thing to do is to have that initial meeting
Mhm.
and then say, okay, we're going to meet again tomorrow.
Let's circle back.
And I'd love to
Yeah.
hear you
Yeah.
respond, ask any questions.
Why do we deny though? Like, why do we not just comfort say, I didn't understand it. Can you explain again? But it's just the thought of having other
people
people
around,
around
judging
Yeah,
you.
just
judging you, and that
because
makes
you
you
didn't
feel
get
some
it.
uncomfortable, and
Hi.
then you're like,
You
That's-
didn't get it.
Like,
Come
why
on.
didn't you
Yeah.
get it?
Why you didn't
But
get
you
it?
know what I mean by that.
Like, you're
I feel
smart.
like we're so
Oh.
judgmental to ourselves.
We
You know?
we are, and the problem is, and I say this to students, if you have this question, I can guarantee you
Others have it.
half the rest of the class has it
Yeah.
as well.
Absolutely.
No stupid questions.
No.
Your neighbor's probably thinking the same thing, but he or she's also afraid
Mhm.
to ask it. One of us
Right.
have to be the bigger person and be like, yo, I got a question.
Well, and I'm going to say you strike me as an extrovert.
Actually,
Ooh.
No,
I'm not. I'm
Oh.
an introvert. What's the term now when you're an introvert, extrovert?
You're kind of both.
I'm a little
You're,
of
you're in
both.
between.
Okay.
Like, I know when to be social and all that stuff, but I also enjoy my alone time
Okay.
and isolation.
All right. Well, but extroverts tend to think out loud.
Yes.
Whatever's in their head, they're
Yeah.
verbalizing. Introverts want to take some time
Process.
and sit with things and process, and they don't want to speak out. And so, again, that's another really important aspect, is to be aware of, who you're speaking to. Do they need that time?
Mhm.
I know a lot of teachers that your grading participation, people are supposed to speak up in class. Not everybody is comfortable speaking up at that moment in class.
Yes, I
And
was that young girl in class that wouldn't speak up. I
Yeah.
said, you can't even say my name right. I'm not talking. But I just also, I like to sit in my thoughts. I like to let it marinate. I like to let it process. Because sometimes even like arguments, like we can't argue right now. Like I need to go take an hour.
do some prep.
And do some prep work. And then I'll come back to you when I can have the conversation. So I was always like that in school too.
Yeah. And that's absolute, that probably getting into things like the Myers-Briggs and other personality indicators were very important for me as a teacher, because I'm a huge extrovert.
Yeah.
But knowing that not everyone is, and then also knowing I am a big picture thinker when a lot of people like details, and I'm a feeler, so I care for other people. And so there are an awful lot of students. I teach telling a lot of stories, and you're supposed to take the point away. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I'll do that. And then people will say, well, okay, what do I need to know for the test?
Right.
Is it on the
Can
test?
you get to the point?
Get
Or
straight
more
to what I
direct.
need to know.
Yeah, more direct. Yeah.
And we all have those moments too. Like, just get straight to the point.
Exactly.
I ain't all that gibberish, blah, 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 in between stuff. Get right to it.
Well, it's funny. At the class yesterday, we had one person, they were supposed to talk about a good communication practice that they did and maybe a bad one. And she said, well, I'm very direct. And not everybody wants me to jump immediately to the point. Some people want me to be fluffy. And I thought that was funny. She called that fluffy. But,
Fluff.
That was certainly an issue Americans ran into when they started doing business in Japan. Is we wanted to jump to the contract, and they need to know you. They need to have tea with you.
Trust.
Know a little bit about your
loyalty
family.
and respect.
Absolutely.
That's how they rule.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I feel like this is like every culture is going to be different when it comes to
100%.
this type of conversation, because culturally, Chinese, Vietnamese people, they're like, no eye contact. We want the fluff or whatever you want to call it. And then there's other people like, no, just get to it.
Yeah, get to the point.
I don't have all day.
Well, and at least a little bit of that has to do with how homogenous your culture is.
Yeah.
Has everybody had similar experiences, similar religious backgrounds? If so, there's almost a built-in trust. Whereas we're such a multicultural country that you can't assume those things. And so you need to develop them over a little bit of time, at least, before you go forward.
I like that. So, just kind of hearing this conversation, because I really love this subject just based on my own personal experience too, because of what I want to do, in the future, because that's going to require these skills, which is a good thing that, we're having this conversation when it comes to conscious communication. Just to talk about myself, I don't shy away from having conversation. I've been learning, but I've learned when we did that last episode 6, and we were talking about it, I started doing it too. But what I tend to do is, for me, I tend to overspeak. And then so my intelligence gets the best of me, and then people are like, okay, these are big words, but we don't understand. And then I'm in a room of, like you said, of different culture, and they were like, okay, this is getting a lot, but what are you talking about again? And I get to a point where I go from being very American and then having an accent that's like, okay, this accent is taking us somewhere. And then people are now like, instead of listening what I'm saying, it turns into, what are you from?
Why is he talking that way?
No. What do you think will be the best practice for me? So that keeps me grounded. That's the question that I have for me right now.
Okay, I actually have an answer for that. So when we say stereotypes, we tend to think of that as negative. But in fact, it's a simple way of organizing the world.
Yeah.
If you met every human being you met, totally blank slate, that would be incredibly tiring, incredibly difficult, incredibly time-consuming.
Boring.
She said boring.
Sorry, but I gotta say it.
No, absolutely. And so we categorize people with accents, people with, who dress this way, people. And the key to stereotyping is it helps us kind of organize the world, but hold on to it very lightly. Check and see if the assumptions that you're making are
Correct.
correct or not. And so, my brother and his wife, my brother's adopted, he's Vietnamese, his wife is Indian. They're both doctors. So Vicky talks about walking into rooms and people will say, "Oh, where are you from?" And she said, "Well, I've lived in Washington a long time, but I grew up in Ohio." Now, if you're asking my ethnicity,
Yeah.
There's a difference.
I can tell
There's
you
a
that.
difference.
But kind of being aware of, I mean, you do. If you're a very good communicator, you are kind of aware of who your audience is,
hmm
how educated they are, what their cultural background is, all
And
of
that
that kind
makes
of
you
thing.
shift yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
Like,
right.
okay, when I walk in this room, I have to talk this way, I have to be
Mhm.
this way, I have to do that mind shift.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and you were talking about being very good at dumbing things down
Yeah.
or kind of bringing them down. I had that sort of observation about my teaching years ago is there was this one professor who talked in really big words and people are like, "Oh, he's so smart."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Yeah, but is he understandable?" I work very hard at making the things I'm talking about
Relatable.
make sense to you,
Yes.
relatable,
Yeah.
understandable.
Mhm.
That I think makes me a very good teacher.
I would agree.
Mm.
The best.
Oh,
She said,
thank you, love.
Speaking from
I
your
love
student.
that.
Yes.
Definitely. I
Yes.
love that.
Yeah.
No, just because you're using big words doesn't mean that
You're the
you know,
smartest person in the
you're the
room.
smartest
No.
person in the room. But like being able to read
Yeah.
people and understand if they're understanding you and kind of like toning it. It's good to know. It's very good to know. I'm gonna start using that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I just do too much. Not too much in a way that I'm like I said, I'm over speaking. It just like I know I can read my room. Okay, I got it. And then it gets to a point when I'm just like, okay, now I'm saying words that we're just like, okay. Now it's taking you somewhere else. This is not fair. So
I mean, sometimes
it's good to
people
understand
just run
it.
into being an over talker,
Right,
oversharer.
Yeah.
Especially if you're passionate
Yeah,
about
Right.
it
Oh,
And
and
very
you're
absolutely.
passionate.
knowledgeable about
Yeah,
it.
you're
Sometimes it just
passionate.
gets away from
Yeah,
you and you
yeah.
go on a whole
And then go on a
tangent.
different way. And I am very passionate especially when I have conversations about being creative.
Yeah.
I get so passionate. I get way too passionate. We're like, okay, we get it. This
Right.
is you love
Mhm.
doing this, but this is
Mhm.
we're tired of this conversation. Can we move on to the next
Right.
thing?
But if you're in the
So-
right room with the right people
Right.
that know
Right.
you,
It's
They'll
fabulous.
they'll understand and
Yeah,
they'll still
that's
be
it.
engaging with you and asking you questions because they care that you care.
Yeah, that's
So-
good.
But that's part of reading your audience too. If
Yeah.
you're going on too long, you kind of go, "Okay, let me pull
Yeah.
this
Like
back
they're
a
not
little."
feeling this.
Right.
But if you see that they're into it,
Yeah.
keep it
Mhm.
going.
But now I
Mhm.
feel like I time my conversation now, and then it feels like I didn't get enough out, and I feel
Bad
so bad and disappointed.
in
That's
Is
yourself.
another
that
thing.
normal
That's
for me to
another
feel?
thing too.
Well, it's tough, and what I was thinking about is years and years and years ago, when politicians would go out to travel around and campaign,
Yeah.
they would very often be talking to very similar audience. So you're stopping in Iowa to talk to the 4-H, and then
Yeah.
you're in Columbus to talk to the Arbor Society, and you were talking to very specific audiences. One of the difficulties of being a contemporary politician, you're talking to everybody all at
Mhm.
once.
All nationalities, all
Right.
age, genders,
People that agree with you, people that don't agree
Yeah.
with you, all of that. And so, it is difficult to kind of figure out where you come out on some of that. And so I would say that the fact that you overshare, that you overexplain maybe
Mhm.
is both your passion and your concern for the people that you're speaking to, that they do understand, that they
Mhm.
do get what you're talking about. And in some ways, people that just give these brief kind of blips and then expect people to understand what they meant
Understand.
are erring way on the other side. And
Yeah.
so it's a tricky thing to kind of figure
Balance.
out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's good to know.
It is.
Very good to
Interesting.
know.
I'm so upset that I missed the first session.
Yes.
Sorry.
So if you haven't listened to the episode,
Yeah,
go back
no.
and listen. Okay,
Please.
Regina.
You were sick, so it's
am.
okay.
No.
You were
But
sick.
I want to go back to, going back talking about unconscious communication, because it's
Yes.
just like I'm trying to understand a little bit deeper. He was
Mhm.
talking about sometimes how he struggles to be able to, expressing self, in a room of people that are with, different culture, different religions, different backgrounds. But it's a not only also unconscious communication, a way to identify the message of how you communicating yourself to others. Like be able to consciously understand, okay, I am in this, this room and everybody has different backgrounds. Should I shift, my
My
level of
Oh,
communication
conversation.
in a way of like consciously making that decision to be able to, you know,
Translate my message
translate the message
to
in a way that
everybody.
it's tangible, that is understandable. So I want to just kind of understand a little bit
yeah.
more.
So one of the things that people have studied is self-talk, and there are a lot of elements here, but I'll just go to begin with. This is there is a certain amount of awareness. Fancy word, self-reflexivity.
Mhm.
How aware are you of yourself? How you're coming across at any point in time?
Mm-hmm.
All of that. And people that are not self-reflexive are frustrating because they're just clearly being absolutely who they are, regardless of who they're talking to, regardless. And for those of us who are self-reflexive, that seems impolite
Rude
or rude or not very accommodating and that kind of thing. But you do all kinds of self-talk about here's what I want, I want to achieve today and what I'm talking about. I either need to get this project started or explain this topic or whatever. And and then if to veer off in a slightly different way, your self-talk also tells you how you're feeling about how you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I am looking good today, I'm speaking very articulately, I'm doing really great. Or, oh man, I didn't get enough sleep and I'm not doing well. Part of working particularly with students who are perhaps not as confident is to try to get their self-talk on the right
Great track.
path,
Yeah.
that you're giving yourself reinforcing and positive messages rather than negative kinds of messages, because that just absolutely undermines your confidence, um, your capacity to stand up there and really present authentically. And
Mm.
so uh, we want to think about the kind of messages that we're giving ourselves, both about our own identity, about how we're presenting, all that kind of
What what techniques would you give someone to do some self talk?
thing.
Because you said you do this with your students
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. What
Yeah.
techniques or resources or something that people can do on their own?
Well, first, becoming very aware of it,
Okay.
because it almost, like we said, it almost happens unconsciously, that these things are going through your head. But first of all, to kind of step back and become aware, how do I feel when I step out of the house first thing in the morning, when I go on a date, when I walk into a room full of people I don't know. Just becoming aware of those kind of messages and then doing a certain amount of reframing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Public speaking, I was talking about public speaking
Mm-hmm.
last time,
Yeah.
is something that most people just absolutely dread the idea
I
of,
hate it.
right? Standing up, partly it's that you're standing up embodied, being judged by all the people watching you, you're feeling very vulnerable and that sort of thing. And so not many people love public speaking, but uh, when students say, well, my hands get shaky, my stomach goes in knots, there are some lovely psychological kind of reframing techniques that you say, okay, when your stomach feels all kind of fluttery, maybe that's excitement.
Mm-hmm.
That's you getting ready to do a great job and kind of be on point.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of reframing some of those messages, but just becoming aware of them.
Okay.
And if they're negative, trying to kind of think about, well, what's that about that I'm self-defeating in this way? How do I get
Okay.
myself to be my own best,
Version and
cheerleader? And
yeah.
right.
Okay.
Interesting.
I'm going to get some questions too. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So on the social and psychological aspects, what role does unconscious or conscious communication play in romantic attraction?
Oh,
Ooh.
that's a great
That's a
question.
good question. Let's get into it.
I'm gonna take notes.
You should. You better. Get you a clean sheet of paper, girl.
That's right. Gosh, oh, there are so many things. Too bad Gnome left.
Oh, right.
There are all kinds of theories about how the sorts of people we're attracted to reflect elements of our parents or our families, and if we're trying to fix something or if we're taking back something we like. The way someone presents themselves in terms of, again, confidence. Do they speak, freely? Do they stand with, head high and good posture? All of those kind of things can be incredibly attractive in a person. On the dark side of that, you know, one of the things I tried to teach women years ago was to stand up and walk with,
Straight up.
straight up, good posture, but like you're going somewhere.
Confident.
Because
you're walking with a purpose,
right? But because if you look like a victim, if you're sort of slumped and unsure and all this kind of thing, you're allowing yourself to be potentially picked out to be someone who can be taken advantage of and all that.
Which is so funny you said that. I recently read a study of they videotape a whole bunch of people in New York walking, and then they showed it to like serial killers in prison.
Oh,
to see which victims they would pick and why.
Oh, wow.
And basically they broke down how people walked. Like if you walk, on your phone, you're not paying attention, you can be a potential victim to get kidnapped or whatever. Or if you walk strong head up or you looking around, you're being like really observant, they won't pick you because you're watching your area. You're not easy to like sneak up on or grab or whatever. But like they were like watched like 5 hours of this video, and they was picking victims. It was all the same across the board.
Oh, wow.
And I thought that was interesting. I was
that
like,
is
that's
Just body language.
just body language and walk how you walk. And then like when I read that, I was like, how do I walk?
I know.
Exactly.
You
So
kind of
when
want to look.
I was leaving my secondary job last night, I was like, okay, I take big steps, not small little baby steps. So they like, okay, she's walking with a purpose. And I always watch my surroundings. I'm not on my phone. I have my keys in my hand. I'm going to my car. I was like, okay, I'm not going to be a victim. I don't fit the category.
Well, and that's sort of an unconscious communication element, is what women have called women's intuition is simply reading their environment a lot better.
A lot.
Yes.
Right? Does that person look menacing? Is what are my surrounding? What's going? Now you said you pay attention to your environment.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Very much so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes my wife is like, "Okay, can you relax?" I'm like, "I can't because I am." My dad was in the military. Ex bodyguard, and so it's like everything that I have to my surrounding, I have to know it 360. Even when I'm driving, constant when I'm driving. If somebody's right behind me for 5 minutes, I'm like, okay, you right by now. I have to slow down now because I can't help it because I want to make sure like I know where I am and what's happening, and that's what I've learned, as a young kid and even till today, and it actually has helped me a lot.
Well, and I said it's much more often women in this country, and again, historically, because women are more likely to be victimized.
Exactly.
But if you're in a position, bodyguard, military, anywhere that's got, civil unrest and that kind of thing going on, you're going to become much more aware of that. But sort of how much do you trust when you start feeling something's odd, something's not going right here? You absolutely should trust that.
Yeah.
And getting people to be willing to, because people say, "Oh, women's intuition," but it is very often based on very important pieces of the environment that they're picking up on.
Women's intuition.
Yeah.
It's never fails.
That should be a whole nother topic
conversation. And real quick, I just want to thank Audubon University.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Audubon. We appreciate you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for everything that you do.
Absolutely. And then my other question, I have a lot of questions, so please excuse me.
No problem.
Can unconscious or conscious communication be used to detect lies or deception?
Oh, great question. So, a lot of lie detection. I've had police officers and others in classes before, and they do get training. They get training on everything from you have, someone that you're interviewing. You watch their body language.
Mhm.
Are they going to jump across the desk and attack you? Are they going to, you pick up
Are
on
they
all
fidgety?
these.
Are they sweating?
Right.
Are their words becoming mumble? Are they not speaking loud enough? Are they not articulating their words?
Right.
I watch a lot of SUV.
Yeah, I do too. I do too.
I'm a sucker for the Criminal Minds and stuff.
Exactly. And lie detector tests are not admissible in court for the
Right.
most part because they're looking at things like, is your pulse going up? Is your heartbeat racing? Are your palms sweating? And it could just be you're nervous because you're hooked up to a machine.
Right.
It may not be that you're actually lying. But can you tell if someone's lying? There are some studies about directions eyes go when you're visualizing something you have seen versus visualizing something you're making up. And so there are some little studies like that. One of the big things, I've only ever been called to court, to jury duty once. And so I was in one case, but then was up for a second case. And the lawyer started off it was a murder trial. And they started off by saying, how many of you have kids? If your kid is telling you a story and all this, all we want you to do is determine if this young man, is telling a story here, or if he was actually involved in this. And I immediately thought to myself, no, that's not how it works. The reason you can tell if your child is lying is because their typical patterns.
Yeah, your kid.
Right. And when they're deviating from that.
Yeah.
Do they usually just say, yep, or do they say, well, Mom, I went right to Robbie's house after school and give you this whole
no.
Why are you lying?
Yeah. Right. And so what this lawyer was asking was actually not a reasonable thing. We didn't know this young man.
Right.
We don't know his typical patterns. It's the people we know best that we can usually detect if their patterns are different. If they're varied and so suddenly they're giving us a big long story when they don't usually. At the same time, and I can't think of what it's called right off the bat, but there is a predisposition of people to believe the people that they love, even when there are indications that they might not be
saying the
as
truth,
truthful.
telling you. Yeah.
And so, right, there is also projection, right? You're feeling guilty, and so you project that on the other person. You're the one cheating, and so you're like, you're cheating. You show me your phone, and it's like, no. It's just you're trying to get rid of your own guilt by projecting it.
To me.
Wow.
Interesting.
So.
And then my last question before we close. I'm sorry. I know.
Go
ahead and ask.
The last question that I have, which we're just talking about culture when it comes to unconscious or conscious communication. But my last question is, how do culture and upbringing affect conscious or unconscious communication?
I would say it affected a lot.
Absolutely.
Only my mom is from the South. So she's in Mississippi, and when I say the South, I'm talking about cotton field, corn, country. Like no lights.
Okay.
Porta potty outside, like country.
And if somebody says something, she goes, bless your heart. What does that mean?
That you're stupid and she doesn't really want you to bless your heart. It's different in every
right. And
culture.
And that's a fascinating thing because absolutely differs by culture, but even parts of the United States, like you're pointing out, how do you be polite? Very different in the South than in New England and in,
else,
and so you learn the patterns of your biological family. How do you be polite? How do you deal with somebody of a senior to you? What kind of address? I taught in the South, Oklahoma and Texas, and I was regularly addressed as ma'am,
yes, ma'am,
and professor, Mrs.
Yes, sir.
Straight, all these kind of things. I have students to this day who can't call me by my first name because that's not considered polite in their family. You call or if they do, it's Miss Carrie.
Yep.
And so what was exhibited in your family, and at some point, very often it's in college or beyond when people go to work, they start evaluating, do I want to accept? A lot of it happens unconsciously. We just pick up the appropriate behaviors from our families, but at some point we may evaluate them and say, well, that was okay, but it didn't feel totally honest to me, and I'm going to start being more
More this
upfront
way.
with my children or whatever. And so you make obvious choices to kind of change your behavior, but certainly how you grew up, and then generationally we're seeing all sorts of differences, right? Because
Mhm.
kids nowadays are so much on social media that kind of how you interact with people has changed a lot. One of the things we're very concerned about is that this generation is on their phones and their tablets and
their
everything
devices.
so much that they've lost the capacity to have a simple
Conversation.
conversation.
Wow.
Yeah. They're
They-
not social.
Right. They don't
I mean,
do-
they're social on social media, but as far
Right.
as like person to person, face to face,
Yeah.
and
don't
especially
know.
small talk with somebody they don't really know.
Yeah.
They don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And so you go into a job interview and they say, well, tell me a little bit about
Yeah,
what
they're
you do in your
struggling
spare
with it.
time.
They can't even
It's hard to
Oh, wow.
articulate that. So
stuff.
lost a lot of that small talk. Also have very often, and people, this is another one that comes from your family. How do you deal with conflict?
yes.
Do you come right out with it, or do you hold back, or do
Yeah.
you never say things that are disagreeable?
Wow.
And that's gotten even worse with social media because you break up on Instagram and
Yeah.
you do this on Facebook and you don't do it
Mhm.
face to face. And so
Mhm.
we've lost a lot of those skills for negotiating meaning and understanding.
It was like what Norm was saying. Is it Dr. Norm?
Mhm.
Building those connections and
Mhm.
having those relationships with people.
Yeah.
Nurture your
Nurturing
connections.
your connections.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nurture your connections. That's what he was
Absolutely.
talking
And
about.
that will start by communicating people.
Mhm.
right,
Communicate.
right. And you ask about relationships. I'm a huge supporter of things like premarital counseling.
Yes.
Mhm.
Because again, depending on how well you are at talking to each other, it doesn't hurt to have a third neutral party who says, hey, thought about how you're going to run your budget?
Yeah.
Thought about how many kids you want?
Yeah.
And so having another party to just kind of bring some things up that you may or may not have talked about yourself can't hurt, I think, and hopefully can help you consider the stuff you need to think about ahead of time.
Nice.
Okay.
Dr.
Anything
Carey!
else?
No.
I
Anything else, Dr. Care, probably you want to
Oh,
express
gosh.
to
share.
help us understand more the importance of unconscious communication,
Unconscious.
and how to communicate effectively.
Well, so recently my niece is graduating from Boston University, and I got an email. And as part of a career planning class, they were supposed to send this email to a number of family members, friends, and all that. And it was basically feedback. What are 2 words that you think of when you think of me? What do you think my particular strengths are? What do you think? And what a great thing, because this is what everybody should be doing.
I
Yes.
recently had to do one for my niece.
Oh, very good.
She just graduated from Bowling Green.
Okay.
And her professor, well, she interned for me too in the summer, but her professor sent me a little survey feedback on like how she worked and where she's going in life and things of that nature. So it's very similar. And I was just like, they didn't have this when I was in college.
No,
I
and
like
It would have been good to know.
Yeah.
well,
I like
and
that.
so here is one kind of thing I'll say is one of the things we mention is the more successful you've been in your career, in relationships, in life, the less likely you are to solicit feedback.
Mhm.
I'm doing great.
Mhm.
I don't need to know anything more.
Right.
And all of us need to do kind of continual check-ins,
Yeah.
continual learning about
Yeah.
ourselves and
Mhm.
improving our patterns,
Yep.
and so that's good for everyone.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm going to send you guys surveys
I
All
know.
right.
about me.
So, guys, as we're getting ready to where we're, as you can see, usually I give you guys an ending, outro. I don't have anything.
No,
I don't have anything.
I
You
don't.
know, there's
Please.
just so much.
Please improve your level of communication.
Because I'm looking at myself and how
Interact
I
with
navigate
people.
in life. Yeah, how I navigate in life. Usually I'm like, hey, come here, sit down. If you have a glass of wine, listen to me, do this.
No.
The only thing I'm gonna go eat, Dr.
At least
Schrayer,
he's offering
thank
you a glass of wine.
Yeah, yeah.
I do like a good glass of wine.
So all I'm gonna say, Dr. Straya, thank you again. I know it's not just we are. This conversation isn't done yet. I know there will be more conversation to be have about communication just in general and speech also. We'd like to thank you and also thank you, Otterbein, for this opportunity
Yes.
Yes,
for
thank you,
these amazing
Artavine.
guests.
Yes.
Uh, thank you. And
Thank
we
you.
out.
We
That's all
out.
I have.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
everyone.
All right, bye. I don't have anything.
That's wonderful.
Like,
I'm speechless.
I said it all.
Speechless.
I'm
Yes, I literally. You always do that to people.
Oh.
I'm so
You
speechless.
always do
this is
that
my
to
first time
people.
meeting
I
you.
don't know what
And I loved
what
it.
the-
And what do you
So
do?
true.
I do a lot of things. I'm an entrepreneur, but
Okay.
I also work in the gas and oil industry where I don't
Wow.
really get to talk to people.
She's
Yeah.
a model.
Yeah,
Oh,
model, all
very
that
cool.
fun
All that
stuff.
stuff.